back here on the Cover 3 podcast. It was not an assistant coaching carousel that was like robust with the kind of earth-shattering names like, when we had Chip Kelly leaving his UCLA head coaching position to go be the new offensive coordinator at Ohio State. We did not have a lot of those, big time landscape shifting type changes, but at places like Ohio State, we had significant changes. We had places like Penn State, which had a poaching. We had Alabama bringing back a familiar name. We had some schools that are on the rise, like a Miami or a South Carolina, addressing one side of the ball or the other. We got our Noel boys in the house for a total rebooting of the Florida State staff. I got a long list to be able to go down, but I think that I want to start with the ones that are the top of mind that were just like most impactful. So, Bud, when I think about the assistant coaching carousel for this 24-25 off season, where was a change where you felt like your opinion of a team was going to be altered, where we're like on that tiny little, an assistant coach is not going to lead to a big change of the knob, but you see something and you're like, okay, this is a plus value add for this particular team.
I think there are a lot of them. I like the Jason Beck hire at Utah.
Let's go.
I think he did a really nice job at New Mexico. I think he'll do a nice job there at Utah. So that one, and I don't think any was a bad coach. I think it just kind of ran its course, obviously, and the whole rising thing made that a very difficult situation to coach under recently. I think Mike Shula is probably a pretty good hire for South Carolina with the internal promotion with Dow Loggins leaving. I think he has a nice history of working with quarterbacks. And, from watching Lenora Sellers in the bowl game, the dude obviously has great legs and he has a very strong arm, and he needs to work on the vision and processing portion of his game, which is not surprising for a freshman quarterback. But Shula, I think, does have a nice reputation of working with quarterbacks if you look at his track record. I mean, he also is kind of the reason why Tebow almost went to Alabama. And like, if you want to go back that far, right?
Well, I mean, you only need to go back to 2015 because he was the offensive coordinator for the Carolina Panthers during Cam Newton's MVP season. I mean, and Mike, it's not Mike Shula's job to teach Cam how to jump on a fumble. That's
he may not be a good head coach, but I think the guy works well with quarterbacks.
Right. Being able to utilize that skill set in a way that could be able to help Lenora Sellers live up to what are sky high expectations.
Exactly.
Tom?
I would say, I think Jim Knowles is the biggest move, but I don't know if it's the most impactful. So it's like, it depends on how you want to look at the word. I think it impacts more relations between Penn State and Ohio State than it does the actual Penn State defense, because they were already pretty good. I'm going to go with Corey Hetherman at Miami, simply because I think that when you look at Miami in comparison to who they're typically playing on their schedule every year, like when you have that kind of talent advantage overall against your opponents, you don't need to be as aggressive as Miami was being especially last year. Like, you could have just been a little more conservative and you probably would have had better results. And I think Hetherman, he's not conservative, but I think that compared to what Lance Guidry was doing, it's a fundamental shift in how they're going to play defense. And I think that it's going to pay off for them because, again, like, Miami's got better players than most of the teams it faces every single week in the ACC. So you don't need somebody that's trying to generate an advantage when the advantage is already there. And I just think if you look at Hetherman's track record, he's been very good at every single stop he's gone to. I think it's reasonable to expect that Miami's defense will be much better with him in charge than it was this past year.
Well, let's sit there for a second. For those who might be listening, I mean, Miami fans have already done like the full breakdown, but if you're an ACC fan, if you're a Florida fan who's wondering what you're going to get, what is the blueprint? What is the book on Corey Hetherman in terms of what we should be expecting from him as a defensive coordinator coming to take over that group?
Less blitzing, not as much man coverage with your secondary, more zone stuff, just relying on your front to generate the pressure and letting everybody else kind of just do their job and forcing, the quarterback to make decisions instead of just knowing where, like, being hot all the time, essentially. So I think that it's not more complicated as much as it's just, I have better players than you do. And we saw it at Minnesota where he did not have a tremendous talent advantage. So he had to mix things up a little bit. But overall, he was facing worse offenses in the Big Ten. But I think at the same time, the bottom half of the ACC's got very similar offenses to the worst of the Big Ten. So I just think if you're Mario Cristobal, watching your defense last year give up all those big plays because you were being overly aggressive and then not adjusting to it, you probably said, I need somebody who's not going to be sending the damn house every single time especially when the other team knows it, because it's all you ever do. It's easy to plan for something that you know is coming. So somebody who's a little less predictable and a little less aggressive, I think will be overall better for the Miami defense.
Agreed. If you pair that with the portal haul, like they just need to hit on DB better this time.
Right.
It's like it's not exactly the same, but it's not all that different to what Ryan Walters was doing at Purdue, where he was asking the guys he had to play a style of defense that they weren't really equipped to play. And when you look at what Miami was dealing with last year, whether it's just the injuries and the guys not being as good as maybe they hoped they would be, they were not equipped to play that style, but they kept asking them to play that style.
TK.
I have a name for you.
Ooh.
So you mentioned Jim Knowles as the highest profile, highest paid move at coordinator. And I agree with you. I don't think it's the most significant. If you look at the defenses prior to Jim Knowles' rival, there really hasn't been an issue. Right? They've been awesome. You had Tom Allen and you had Manny Diaz, and that defense has been pretty dominant. I went with the guy who left. I went Tom Allen going to Clemson, and the impact of this one is I think it does. So Clemson has a lot of the pieces coming back on offense. Cade Klubnik, top 5 QB in the country next year. If you want to take his Heisman odds, go ahead and make some money, even though Tom's a hater. But I think there's some similarities here because what we saw on the defensive side was elevated from within. Dabo is very loyal to his guys, and that's what he did with Wes Goodwin. I just don't think it worked for whatever reason, but their defense has not been as dominant as it's been in years past, kind of similarly to what we saw when Brandon Streeter was there. The offense was kind of stagnant, wasn't doing a lot. He elevated one of his guys, but what did he do? He went out and got Garrett Riley, and that offense, after a couple years, all of a sudden starts humming. I think Dabo realized the same thing could happen on the defensive side of the ball. And I do think Tom Allen coming in, I think it's a perfect fit philosophically as far as buy-in, all-in, family, the Clemson mantra, the things that you hear about, more old school, let's try to keep guys here. But I also think similar to the Miami hire, I think Tom Allen is going to rely on better athletes up front and not try to do so much schematically. He's not afraid to blitz, but running a 4-2-5, he's going to try to rely on a defensive line that can get after it. They have hit the portal a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I do think this could be one of the more significant hires, getting Clemson's defense back on track in a year when they should be the favorites to win the ACC. I know Miami will be there, but they should be a playoff team with a quarterback that has potential of, having the game he did against Texas, which was good enough to win. I think this could be pretty significant.
Here's a question for you, though. Not to overrule anything you said, because I agree with what you were saying. But by moving from last year's Penn State defense to next year's Clemson defense, is Tom Allen upgrading the talent he has to work with, or is it a downgrade?
Well, he doesn't have an Abdul Carter.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's one.
A downgrade from what he had, or a downgrade from what he would have at Penn State?
I think that just if you look at what he had at Penn State this year compared to what he will have at Clemson next year, I don't think he's going to have nearly as much talent as he had at Penn State. Not to say that Clemson's defense stinks. It doesn't.
Yeah, I just don't
overall, there's no Abdul Carter.
Right?
There's not. I don't think they have the same kind of depth along their defensive line that he had at Penn State.
The depth was an issue, but they also are returning a ton from the defense. And so, I mean, to Bud's point, I still think you're working with one of the more I think you were working with one of the most talented defensive units in the ACC. Mm-hmm. And I think you were working with a top 15 nationally?
They're a blue chip ratio team, right, Bud?
Both are, yeah.
Yes.
Clemson and Penn State.
And I thought I remembered last year. Now, this is last year, but again, talking to the returning talent, weren't they one of the top 5 like composite rankings teams? Top 5? Wasn't it higher than you would think because they recruited so well?
I don't.
Maybe I was wrong
I
about
don't
that.
recall.
But sometimes
It would logically make sense.
Yeah. The sometimes the math don't always math with some of the total. Yeah, math is hard, But I would say that, Danny, when you look up and down the depth chart for the Clemson Tigers, you see a lot of names of blue chip players who've got the size, who've got like real athleticism, and that I think that what Dabo Swinney looked at was in Wes Goodwin. He had someone who he liked a lot as a person and who he enjoyed a lot of success with when he was there as sort of like Brent Venables' deputy, but he did not feel as though a talented defensive unit was always put in the best position to succeed. And that's why you make a move to somebody who's a little bit more seasoned and a little bit more experienced, and certainly coming off a giant win of a season with Tom Allen. I don't think it's a huge step down. If you make me make a call, Tom, sure. Penn State defense in 2024 versus Clemson defense in 2025, slight step down. But I'm not going to say that he's going to have to get more creative or change his style just to be able to lead a successful unit. What if we are to stay in the ACC? And I want to come back to the Big 12 because I think there's some other ones that are very notable. I wanted to throw some changes at you and some questions. Okay. NC State Wolfpack. Ow. Offensive coordinator Kurt Roper, defensive coordinator DJ Elliott. So remember, you lose Tony Gibson. Tony Gibson goes to be the new head coach at Marshall. Robert Anae is out. The NC State offense, look, we can blame concussions. We can blame some injuries along the offensive line. Brennan Armstrong didn't quite work out. MJ Morris, like redshirt in the middle of the season. It's been a little bit of a mess. But this was an NC State team that entered last year with like ACC dark horse type category and finished the year just like sort of sputtering into a bowl game. You end up losing to ECU. So how did Dave Doran do? What's the grade for your changes at offensive and defensive coordinator?
Like a C, like a upgrade on offense, downgrade on defense, I think.
Yes.
Not inspiring.
Yeah.
Sell me on Kurt Roper.
He's not Robert Anae.
Muschamp respected him a lot for sure.
A lot.
When he was at Florida.
Cutcliffe loved him.
Yeah, that's where I covered him. I called a couple of his games back when he was at Duke. I think the sell on that one is continuity. Elevating from within, similar, right. He'll know the personnel. I was always curious how Dorn would do with Robert Anae and his love with the pass game, and then, they have missed as bad as anybody in the portal on the last two quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. So, you can blame the coordinator all you want, but when both of those are complete duds, that's significant.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's been tough. All right, we got Blake Gideon takes over at Georgia Tech as the new defensive coordinator. Solid?
I think so, and I think it's given what they lost with Tyler. I think that's probably about as best as they could hope to do.
Mm-hmm. Tyler Santucci, who ended up
leaving.
Yeah.
If I'm a Tech fan, I think I'm pretty happy about this hire overall.
Okay. And then one more before we get to our Noles. Offensive coordinator Brian Harsin.
Man, it's got an incomplete grade for me. I almost have to see it,
Isn't it him and Rolo out there?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that could be pretty interesting. And not just for the cultural reasons of Rolovich and Harsin being at Berkeley.
Well, it is. Think about just the collection of names, right? You flash all this back, 10 years or maybe even a little bit less than that. And you say Brian Harsin, Justin Wilcox, Nick Rolovich. it's not late era Jimbo at Texas A&M where the whole staff was just a who's who, but it's not. It's a different version of that, as they've got right there. So it could work, but very curious to see that how that ends up playing out. Okay, Knowles to go time. What's the book? What's the buzz on both sides of this?
I mean, I think they did a nice job on defense. I think that's a good hire.
For those who are not aware, the defensive coordinator is Tony White. They got him from Nebraska. I think that is largely viewed as a very impressive haul. The offensive coordinator is Gus Malzahn.
Yeah.
Yes.
I understand what they're doing in the very short term because of what was going to be available in the portal, right? I don't think this move is the reason that Mike Norvell sinks or swims long term. Although it really could be if hiring Malzahn scares away top quarterback prospects. Like if I'm Cromanhoke, I wouldn't go play quarterback for Gus Malzahn. That's a real running offense if I had NFL aspirations, So in the short term, given what you could likely get in the portal at quarterback and given all the help you needed at receiver, and there wasn't a lot of great receivers in the portal, I think it makes sense to go get Castellanos and try to win 7-8 ball games, but I don't really see what they're building towards right now, long term.
Why wouldn't you want to play for Gus Malzahn? He developed an NFL MVP in Cam Newton.
That's true. Developed.
I think they're going to be more run based. I think they're going to run the ball. They're going to try to be physical. I think Thomas Castellanos is a great fit for a Gus Malzahn system, but I've been fooled before on that, thinking quarterbacks are really good fits. So I'm a little bit concerned about it, which I think is I think the Florida State fan base is split on it as well. There's some people, and I do think maybe Gus is somebody we've seen this happen a lot, and he's had a lot of success as a head coach, been very bumpy, but maybe he's better served as just the play caller, as just the guy. And I know he's been bouncing back and forth between being the head coach and calling plays and then relinquishing and then calling plays. But I do think this is going to be an interesting season.
My prediction is that the offense will have big games against Alabama, Miami, Clemson, and Florida. But then for some reason, it's only going to score 9 points against Virginia. That's my official prediction.
There are 7 games where Florida State will have more talent than the defense they are playing. They should look great in those games. I'm coming on the opposite side of this, Tom. I think that there could be a really a loft issue when they go up against some of the better defenses here, just because as much as you want to putt this or run the trickeration that you can, isn't Mike Norvell still gonna have his hands on that play calling too?
I think so, yeah. But he and Gus are really tight. So I don't even think Malzahn's a terrible coach. I understand the fit. I don't know if what Malzahn runs is something that you want to run if your goal as a program is to win national titles. It feels very Band-Aid, hey, I got to flip this thing fast or I'm getting fired move to me.
Is Mike Norvell in the hot seat?
How many games does he win? If they miss a bowl again, I think they'd find a way to do it.
Right.
If he goes 7-5, I don't think they're going to do that.
Are Florida State fans and important Florida State influencers, Danny Kanell at the top of that list, are they communicating to the football program? Hey, look, you got this can't, you can't do that. There needs to be some big changes, not changes in terms of firings, but there needs to be a big change in terms of the level of production and the what you put out on the field, right?
Yeah, I don't even think you need to speak it out loud. Everybody just knows that. I think that's just a given.
Mm-hmm.
What I think is interesting is the portal approach that they've taken, and Bud's been on this for a couple years. It's highly volatile. where I thought you saw players throwing the towel because the checks were clearing and they had no ties to Florida State and they were getting ready for their NFL draft or the next school that was going to pay them a big bag. And I think that's something that really comes from the top is from Norvell and making sure, because he really harped on this in the year they went undefeated, was we got the right guys that bought in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they got fooled somewhat on some of the players they brought in last year. So they have to get back to getting the right guys. If they get beat by Alabama, of which they're over a touchdown, underdog, or if they get beat, or if they're 2-2 to start the season, that they don't throw in the towel. Because I thought that was the most significant thing. That's what I would go back to, Bud, when you're saying if they don't make a bowl. To me, I don't look at the records. I want to see the players buy in. If they quit again multiple times, that's a significant red flag for me. I mean, they could be 6-6, but if they're just not good enough, and you have quarterback issues, throws picks or something like that, but the players are trying, then I think I'm okay with it. But I mean, you can't have 2 wins, 3 wins. I mean, like you said, Chip, they're going to have more talent.
I just think if he makes the bowl, he's safe. I think if Norvell gets fired, Alford's not the one doing the firing. I think Alford's canned as well. So
yeah, that's a good point.
I think Alford's got all the skin in the game to not make a move because I don't think they would let Alford make the move.
Gotcha. Let's see. Tony White at Florida State. Keith jumped in like almost 2.5 hours before we got started. Hopefully Third and Fuller is dead. Guess that's a reference to Adam Fuller, former defensive coordinator. LSU, Tony White will be huge and the D-line should improve, but Cooper's secondary was bad at Nebraska and their defense got exposed. Secondary coach might need to be changed. I don't think I've got it. I didn't think it was.
I don't think it was that bad.
I don't think it was that bad either. I'm gonna push back on that one. And then,
I think there's a tendency for fans of everybody to think that their secondary sucks because it's hard
to think that you give a bunch of 3rd and long. Of course, like that. Yeah. That's everybody focuses on the 3rd and longs that don't go well for the defense.
Yeah.
And both of the coaches from Nebraska are great recruiters, which is a big part of why they. I know they were. I talked to somebody in Nebraska's athletic department, and they said there were a couple of coaches that really the players gravitated towards, not only because schemes they run, but the players really, a lot of them chose Nebraska because of those guys.
It's interesting. Like some of those guys didn't follow them though. So like I'm a little skeptical of the narrative out of Tallahassee right now with that.
Once you start getting those, once you start eating a Runza, you're not going to go to Tallahassee. Like you're not giving that up.
All right.
They did face some good passing games in looking back at this, like Nebraska,
Illinois,
USC, Ohio State, Illinois, Colorado are like pretty upper tier passing games within the sport last year. Right?
They also had injuries in the secondary to like some of their most important corners.
Yeah, I don't like when I looked at Nebraska last year. I mean, their defense wasn't perfect, but I didn't feel like it was a significant problem for them. Just think they were playing better teams most of the time.